Hello and welcome to August 2020 safety meeting. My name is John Greiner and I'm the president and owner of Basin Safety. And this month we're going to be covering three relatively short topics: stop work authority, hearing conservation, and short service employees. So getting it kicked off with stop work authority, there's a few basic things. Most of us have dealt with this or heard of it or been trained in it, but essentially it's the concept that anybody at any time can stop unsafe work. So in this image here, we had an oil hauler who's relatively new to the industry, so it kind of even goes into the short service employee side of the house. He was backing off a fitting that he had found on the edge of location. The one on his truck had been removed somehow, whether it was taken at a gas station or in the shop, someone had borrowed it, and he opted to take it off of a reserve tank that he found on the edge of location. So as he was backing the fitting off, the entire valve was unscrewing right in the center of the balon valve, of the ball valve. And if you've worked with these, you know how they kind of have an internal configuration threading right there in the center. So he's backing this thing off, not really noticing that the valve's coming apart. And as it came apart, a lot of fluid came out after him because obviously the valve couldn't control the flow. So it sprayed him, put about 40 gallons on the ground there, and from head to toe, this guy, he was a mess. And we didn't know it was in the tank, so chemical burn, he had a little bit of rash, sick for a couple days, but ended up, I think, making a full recovery. But nobody really was helping him or watching him as he was doing this task, because it was not something he had intended to do at the beginning of the day, and didn't really know that the valve could come apart. He said, I didn't know that could happen. And having the ability for someone near you or with you to stop work, especially if you're new, is extremely important. However, most of the time, we find other ways rather than completely shutting a job down to stop something dangerous from happening. And we'll talk about why it's important, how to properly perform stop work, and then also how to document it. So we're going to cover what it is, who can stop the work, and what the proper procedure is. So why stop work? What's the reason to stop work? Obviously, if somebody's doing something or is about to do something where there's imminent danger involved. So essentially, if somebody's going to be hurt or potentially could be hurt, we want to stop the work, whether it's formally with an intervention strategy or informally with, let's say a guy's not wearing the right PPE. You can point at your eyes or at your head like, hey, dude, you don't have your hard hat on, you don't have your safety glasses on or gloves or whatever, or even bring him whatever it is that he doesn't have. Or you could stop the work, say, I'm going to stop work right now, pull him off, coach him, tell him what's supposed to be done, and document that was done. And once again, depending on the type of work, it may be necessary to have a full-on intervention, and other times you may be able to get away with something a little bit more informal. So as far as who can stop work, the answer is everyone. Anyone who's been trained, anyone who's been through Safeland, for example, has some stop work training, and that would give them the authority to be able to stop work. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody who stops work always is doing so with knowledge of why the work's dangerous. And regardless of their knowledge and expertise of the task that you're doing, we want to still encourage a culture of people being able to say, hey, we need to take a minute here to understand this or to make sure that it's being done the right way. So imminent danger situations are obviously the major concern, where somebody's going to, get inside of a trench without the right trench box, or shoring, climb up and work at elevated heights without proper fall protection, cut or weld in an area where they shouldn't cut or weld because there's hydrocarbons and they haven't tested the atmosphere, etc. So anytime there's an imminent danger where death, serious injury could occur, even damage to the environment or to equipment, we want to absolutely stop work if that's about to happen. And as I mentioned before, there's potential danger situations. This is actually a photo I took during, ironically, a safety class. So behind me, the participants of that class were seeing this individual perform work at heights, obviously with no fall protection, no 3 points of contact, and directly below him are concrete rebar forms that are sticking out of the ground as they're about to pour the concrete for the front of this. This is actually on Wheelo Street in Tioga. You may know this building depending on where you live. This gentleman, his name was Noah. Shout out to Noah Bowles there. He was climbing on top of he climbed up one ladder with the fascia board And then as on the one on the right, and as he got to the proper rung that he was trying to get to, he and this was unbelievable, steps over to the other ladder that's, just ever so leaning. Neither one of these is tied off. And, then proceeds to kind of seat that fascia board underneath the drain lip there of that roof edge. And I tell you what, it was something to behold. I took this picture with an old BlackBerry. I mean, it was a pretty wild experience. So after he got down, I went and talked to him. I said, "Hey, man, like I'm not your safety guy. I don't work for you, but man, you probably shouldn't be doing it that way. Like, you might need a man lift." And of course, his reason is, we don't have money for a man lift. It's too expensive, blah, blah, blah. But, stopping work or coaching people when you see them doing something dangerous, even if they don't work for you or with you, can potentially save a life. I know that he did survive miraculously. I think God has a special place for this gentleman. But he, was not in the guy at the bottom there. I think he was not working with him. He was just standing there out of shock and awe. But when we see a potential danger, even if it doesn't affect us or maybe isn't even serious, there are ways to informally do it. As I mentioned, pointing to your hard hat or your monitor if they don't have a monitor on, etc. So depending on how serious the situation is and what it requires, I definitely want to give everybody that's participating in here in this course a bit of freedom to make that decision depending on what type of work it is. Now, how to stop work, some different ways to go about it. Some people, make a big fuss, yell, scream, holler, carry on, and that's not necessarily what you should do. So definitely you want to issue the stop work order if necessary and say, "Hey guys, we need to take a break here, take a minute, assess. We don't have the right stuff, or we don't have enough people, or this hasn't been done, so we need to do this before we can move forward." So definitely talk to everybody. You can state stop work. You're in imminent danger. This is going to go bad because, especially if it's an immediate emergency intervention situation, you want to use some strong language. You don't want to be like, "Hey guys, maybe if we could, it probably, possibly." No, it needs to be very confident and very direct. And describe the unsafe condition as you see it. And maybe you don't even know, but it just doesn't look or feel right. Once again, we want to encourage that culture, even if you don't know. If you feel like you or somebody else or the worker themselves could be in harm's way, we want to go ahead and feel free to stop that work. So some examples, and I mentioned a few already. You need fall protection. We need some shoring. There's an ignition source. The system has not been locked out properly. Hey, we don't have the locks. It's not isolated right. We need to change this. Or you have some stuff that's not secured in your truck, whether it's rigging or even if it's crane lifts or critical lifts. We need to do this a little bit different. So typically we think of this as a supervisor's job, and in a lot of ways it is. But even the brand new, someone who just started, they should have the authority without retribution to stop the work. So after a stop work order happens, essentially we want to make sure that the local safety coordinator or supervisor, whoever's available, is communicated with, that's happened. And if the person doesn't stop working, once again, we want to let the supervisor or the safety person know. We don't want to have one of those situations like in Walmart or Costco around the country where someone's like, "Hey, you need to wear a mask," and then they don't, and then they proceed to beat them up. Makes for pretty entertaining YouTube videos, but not necessarily the way that we want to go about dealing with somebody who isn't complying with the stop work. So as I mentioned, anyone can stop work. Doesn't matter. We want people to follow the rules. Essentially communicate. It's really about team effort. No one wants to see anyone hurt or get hurt, especially if we can prevent it by just taking a short break and reassessing the situation. So when we restart the work, once the work order, stop work orders happen, we've communicated, we've talked it through. Once again, we want to document it, but we want a supervisor or a person in charge to reauthorize it and say, "Yeah, we're good to go," which is pretty straightforward. That's typically the way that we're going to handle things. So if you stop work, we do this a lot with people, especially if we're doing construction somewhere in a highly public area. People are walking by, we'll stop work and be like, "Dude, you need to what are you doing over here? Obviously there's cones, snow fence, whatever. You need to get out of here." That's pretty common. Typically, depending, once again, it may not be documented, but the appropriate person should share that and then communicate with everybody, and then maybe make a change. Install more barriers, more cones, bigger signs, spray people with a water gun, whatever it takes to mitigate the situation. So obviously, there can be consequences. It can lengthen job time. It can slow down the process of completing the job. So there are some negative side effects to this, or some consequences. But and then documentation does not have to be fancy. It can be a text, an email, written on the back of a dirty napkin from the pub last night. It really doesn't matter how we document it, just that it is documented, and that gets into the right people's hands. So that's stop work authority, and it's kind of its nutshell version. Next, we're going to move on to hearing conservation. So hazardous noise is obviously something that we deal with in the oil field, in the construction world, from logistics to fracking to drilling to sandblasting. And so depending on what type of work you're doing, there's different ways of identifying hazardous noises. So I went ahead and typed in the App Store today, decibel meter, and there's this really cool app. There's a few of them out there, and some of them are like crazy fancy, where you just have to spend money and then you can download reports and do all these things. But a lot of them, it works. It's just a sound meter. You put it up next to an engine or up next to a site or a pump, and you can hear exactly how loud it is. And we'll talk about kind of what we're going to do once we find out how loud things are. But you should know how loud the equipment and tools that you're using are, and what the potential impact of that is. So obviously, regardless of what the type of work we do, even if we sit at home and watch Netflix all day, there is going to be hearing loss over time. Just through age, natural progression of life, you're going to lose some hearing. But loud noises can destroy nerves in the inner ear immediately. And if any of you are gun enthusiasts and you like to shoot, this, kind of the way you feel and the ringing in your ears after shooting a gun if you don't have the proper hearing protection on. So when is noise too loud? That's the great question. Kind of the magic number is 85 decibels. So the PEL, or permissible exposure limit, for 8 hours is 85 decibels. So if something's going on and you're 2 feet away from somebody, if you have to shout, that's typically right there about 85 decibels. If you clap your hands, just not even hard, just kind of do a quick clap, that's about 85 decibels. So, you can hear someone clapping from quite a distance. If you've ever been in a stadium with a lot of people clapping, it can get pretty loud. So it doesn't take a whole lot to hit that 85 number. So some long-term effects of overexposure. There's no such thing as becoming less susceptible to sound. Over time, the nerves in your inner ear are a lot like a blade of grass, and just like a blade of grass or a field of grass, if somebody walks over that field of grass, it's going to smash everything down, but it's going to definitely raise back up again. But if we consistently walk across the same path day in, day out, then that path, the grass there, isn't going to grow anymore. It's going to kill the grass, and then obviously it's going to prevent it from growing. That's going to become hard packed. In a similar way, that's what happens to your inner ear when we have a loud sound here and there, not a big issue, but consistent sound at a high decibel rating is going to damage and permanently damage those nerves, and they do not grow back. So short-term exposure, we can recover. Long-term exposure, it's not so likely. So it is usually a gradual loss. The higher frequencies or pitches go first. That's what we can't hear anymore. And then obviously ringing will occur, and that's when pitch is completely being lost. Like, hey, if you've ever experienced ringing in your ears, and probably everyone watching this has, that is a sign of hearing loss right there. You are losing your hearing. And once again, this happens naturally, so it's a little bit tough to gauge, was it something at work? Was it something at home? Was it just natural? But we're going to get into that here in a little bit. So overexposure can cause tinnitus, and some of you may experience this. It's the permanent ringing in the ears, and some people hear it louder when it's quieter around. There's not as much background noise. Some people need to sleep with fans on or white noise just so that they don't hear the ringing in their ears. And it can be severe enough to disrupt sleep and affect walking, even cause depression, balance. It's a pretty serious condition if not untreated. And there are some more modern ways of treating tinnitus, but it is a serious thing. So severity of nerve damage depends on two things: loudness and length of time exposed. And we'll get into that here in a second. So most hearing loss is over time, but anything over 140, that's kind of the other magic number. Anything over 140 decibels will cause immediate permanent damage. And so over 140 decibels, if you can think of anything right off the bat, obviously we got the Matrix here, a guy shooting. You have potentially lawnmowers, airplane engines, helicopters. Certain pumps are going to operate at or above 140 decibels. So just kind of knowing how to gauge what the loudness that you're around and then how long you're around it is also pretty important. So noise exposure, these are kind of the OSHA permissible exposure limits at different time periods. So at 85 decibels, we're good at 8 hours. At 90, cuts every 5 decibels you go up, it cuts the time in half. So now we're at 4 hours, 100 for 1 hour total in a day, 105, 30 minutes, 110, 15, and at 115 decibels, basically that's where that damage threshold starts. So now we're going to get into a little PPE as well as some other ways to protect yourself. So we're going to talk about obviously the purpose of it, types of PPE, how to use the PPE, what an NRR or noise reduction rating is, different types of testing out there, and medical recording and reporting. So the three most common types of hearing protection PPE are muffs, plugs, and caps. However, before we can get into that, the best way to prevent hearing damage is to make sure you have adequate time away from loud sounds during the day, distance from those noises, and then some form of barrier or shielding before you even use your PPE. So, we have a shop next door to us, and these guys have an air compressor inside. Not a great idea because the reverb off the walls, so they just built some housing around it, and that brought that noise level way, way down. So if you can contain it, if you can put it outside, if you can do something to shield yourself, that's good. Also distance, and then once again, amount of time. So obviously the PPE is designed to also reduce the impact of those sounds, and people have in the past used anything that they could. Cotton swabs, cigarette butts, that's not super common anymore, but people have tried to do that, and they just don't work. They're not designed for that purpose. They don't have a good NRR. So hearing protection, ear muffs are kind of the best. They provide over-the-ear coverage. They're durable. You don't have to stick anything in your ear. And then certain ones actually are designed to allow like human speech to come through, but those louder like 115 and above sounds to be filtered out. They are expensive and they're bulky. They get hot in the summertime. They're very cold in the wintertime. They don't retain a lot of heat typically because of the material that they are. So earmuffs are the best option, but not always the best option. Earplugs, usually a little bit better, more comfortable. You can get them customized pretty easily. A lot of different materials, a lot of different sizes. They do have disposable ones. They're nice because they are inexpensive and typically lightweight, but they do fall out. They can cause infection if they're not cleaned. If you don't have the right size, it's not going to be very comfortable and it's not going to work properly. So real quick, properly how to insert earplugs. You've probably seen this image before in a lot of different ways, but essentially you want to reach over with the hand that's not installing the earplug, lift up on the top of the ear or the lip at the top of the ear, roll that foam earplug especially, or even some of the rubber ones, kind of squash it down, insert it into the ear canal, and make sure it's there, and tight fit. And if it's too big, if it's like hurting you, you have too big of a size. You need to get a smaller size. And then if it doesn't really feel like it's blocking very much sound, then you may have one that's too small. So lastly here, we're going to talk about canal caps, which are basically the same as covering your ears. Not a whole lot of protection. Mostly canal caps are good for keeping dust out of your ears, but not a whole lot else. And the reason for that, we're going to talk about here on the next slide, is the NRR, or the noise reduction rating. So every type of hearing protection that's ANSI certified has an NRR, and it's the amount of decibels that it prevents from entering into your ear canal. It's a little tricky here, though. For this one, this is an NRR of 30 label, but that's actually split between both of your ears, so it's actually going to be 15 for each ear. So if we're measuring and we want to get it at or below 85 decibels that we're listening to, then this would only be good for 100 decibel sound, because it's essentially going to be 15 per ear. So you take 100 minus 15, boom, you get a 100 decibel safety rating. At 100 decibels as well, if we're hitting that point, that's another magic number here as it pertains to what hearing protection you need. At 100 decibels, you're going to need both ear muffs and ear plugs. And so typically 30 is about where it maxes out. Once again, you can get customized ones that go higher and even, as I mentioned, block out different pitches. But 30 is about typically the highest we're going to get off the shelf. So it's good to know what kind of hearing protection you have, what's available to you, and then also, once again, what the sound levels are. And you can do that with your iPhone, with your Android. You just download the app, put it up next to where your pump's operating or whatever, where typically people work, and it'll give you an idea of the decibel rating. And then you can take that information and then determine what hearing protection is necessary. And it's only going to work if used properly, obviously. This is a great picture of, I'm assuming this guy doesn't work for the ATF, but if he did, it actually wouldn't surprise me. He's using his pistol as one of his methods of hearing protection here. Probably not the best method. I mean, it's probably going to protect you a little bit, but I do not recommend putting a gun to your head to protect yourself from loud noises. Just FYI, if that ever crossed your mind. All right, audiometric testing. This is essentially the method that we use to determine hearing capability over time. So usually if you're working in an area, factory, or around rigs or somewhere where there's a lot of loud noises consistently, you'll get a baseline test at the beginning of your employment every year afterwards, and that'll measure kind of whether or not your hearing protection is actually working. Depending on who you're working for, they may require this, they may not. You may want to do it yourself if you feel like, once again, you don't have the adequate protection and you want to make sure that you're not losing your hearing, because people, you want to be able to hear your grandkids, and everyone here has grandkids. You want to be able to hear them and talk. You don't want to be that grandma or grandfather who's like, huh? What'd you say, buddy? You don't want to be, maybe when you're 90, but we want to protect our hearing as if it was something that helped us communicate and be in community with others. So most people develop mild hearing loss as they age, kind of no matter what you do, but that yearly testing can detect early signs, and there's things you can do medically, et cetera, to prevent that from happening. So also, as I mentioned, ensuring that your hearing protection at your work is good. And then even as a third benefit, detecting natural losses of hearing as well, or any problems with your ear. People do have other issues in their ear that require medical attention, so that's another good reason to do it. And so these are part of the medical records program, so you're going to get, typically a 30-year hold on these records after you stop working there. So once again, you have the right to see these records if they do audiometric testing on you, and then also they need to retain those for 30 years. All right, so next we're going to move into short service employees. So our focus here is to systematically create excellence with new employees. We've all worked in companies that you get hired on, and it's a little bit of just, figure it out as you go along. And there's some value to that, trying to learn on the job how things work, paying attention, being involved. Those are all really good qualities in an employee. And most, that's what I want in our employees is intellectual curiosity and being incentivized to learn on your own. But systematically, what can we do as supervisors and managers and owners to help our employees kind of learn effectively and be a part of the team? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about in conjunction with what a short service employee program is. So we're going to talk about that definition, why we have them, kind of some mentorship roles and different things we want to do as mentors, and some success strategies specifically for documentation and programmatic processes that we build. So an SSE is an employee that's new to either a position, the industry as a whole, or is new to a company. Typically, they are going to be considered an SSE for 90 to 180 days, depending on the safety sensitivity of the position. So there are some exceptions to this. Let's say I tomorrow hire a brand new supervisor who has 30 years of experience in the safety field, right? So I'm bringing him over here from a competitor or from out of state. Great guy, knows a lot, maybe even knows more than I do. So giving him a green hard hat or a sticker, which are kind of the two best ways to identify an SSE, may be a little bit, it's probably not going to encourage him to really be a part of the team, because he's going to say, hey, I have all this experience, why am I considered a green hat? Well, you can accept this, but you need to do it with documentation. If that person can show a skill set test or information or through the interview process shows that they're capable in that job or that skill set, you can accept them. However, you'll still want to put them through internal company communication training. And the reason for that is just because they're really good at their job doesn't mean that they work well with the crew yet. Doesn't mean that they can assess and understand what people are doing on that crew, on that job with your company, with their team. That takes a little bit of time. So you almost want to make sure that everybody knows, hey, this guy's new. We need to watch out for him. We need to communicate with him a little bit more. We need to get him kind of up to speed with the way that we do things, not just what we're doing. Maybe he knows that very well, but the way that we do things as a company or in this specific position. And you can accept it. However, that process should be well documented and have some pretty good reasons. So mentorship, this is another side of the oil and gas training side with SSEs. We want to assign new people mentors, people who can train them, they can coach them, they can kind of show them the ropes and ensure that they are equipped, trained, and knowledgeable to go out on their own eventually. So new employees should have a foreman, a supervisor, who's responsible for their performance, knowledge, as well as their advancement. They should care about others and be verified as qualified to train, equip, and oversee those people. This oversight should be documented. A lot of times it's not, but most SSE programs, you're going to have a safety checklist of trainings that they have to go through. A lot of times they don't do a competency checklist. And we're going to talk about that at the end here briefly, just ways to create and document whether or not that person knows how to do their job effectively. And not only do their job, but train others how to do their job in the future. So our goal is obviously to get them to be top-notch people. So once again, this should be documented, and then goals and timelines should also be established. And as I mentioned, with typical SSE programs, you have either 90 to 180 days, 3 to 6 months, and so you want to say, hey, after 6 months, this person will have, safe land. They'll have H2S clear. They'll be fit tested. They'll know how to do a pre-trip inspection. They can drive safely. They know what can go wrong downhole. They know what can go wrong on the surface. They know how they're going to hurt their back. Just a myriad of safety topics that you'll put them through to make sure that they're trained. So, as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about SSE excellence, taking new people and making them as effective as quickly as possible so that they're not a liability. Most injuries on the job site happen with employees who've been at a job for less than 6 weeks, not even 6 months. They're new, they're not being watched out for, they're making decisions based on, maybe they want to impress their boss, maybe they want to get it done fast, maybe they don't want to look like they're dumb or don't know what's going on, so they make decisions. And if they're not encouraged to ask questions and that there's no pressure to impress anybody with what you know when you've just started, then typically accidents are going to happen. And that's kind of, I want to go through this exercise here to kind of showcase a method that you can use in your company to document, develop, and advance people, as well as give them the training necessary to ensure that they don't hurt themselves or others. So let's say we have a guy, we just hired him on, he's going to be a forklift driver. That's going to be part of his job. He's going to operate a forklift. So a couple questions here. What should we ensure he knows how to do in order to safely operate a forklift? Some of that's going to be on the forklift, but there's other things besides just operating that forklift that can get him hurt while operating that forklift. So now, after he's competent, how are we ensuring that he can show someone else to operate a forklift? And the problem here, and the reason I say that, is a lot of times we'll bring new people in, we'll train them, we'll call them good, and we don't expect them to say, okay, well, next time we bring a guy in, if you know this well enough, you should be able to show the next guy who comes in. And how would you do that? And that's one thing I really highly stress and encourage with our people is that, hey, if you know how to do this task, that's fantastic. We're happy for you. However, how are you going to make sure that the next guy that we hire is also, I should be able to trust you to do that if I've trained you effectively. And, then there's other things. What if there's hazardous materials, et cetera? And how do we make sure that they know everything? The one phrase that I hate more than any other phrase on the planet is I didn't know. It's kind of a cancerous phrase because and it's on both sides of the fence of the reason for it. But what I didn't know, especially after a mistake's happened or a lack of communication or a lack of success in a project, what it says two things. One, it wasn't shared with them. Or two, they didn't have the insight or the interest in knowing. And there can be, as far as blame, not even trying to assess blame, but there can be fault or a root cause found on both sides. So the goal of this exercise is to develop a system where that does not happen. So for our exercise, we're going to take a guy we hired a few years back, John Doe, and kind of walk through how we trained this individual. So in this case, CQT and kind of an SSC program, CQT is our term for competent and qualified training. So yes, we're going to make sure he has all the safety training, but also we want to make sure that he can perform the way that we expect him to. So typically it should have the name and title of the person, the timeline that we expect him to be knowledgeable about the different tasks, critical tasks identified, every task that individual needs to do to be considered effective in his role or his job position. We want to outline those. And then lastly, each task should have corresponding content, and we're going to look at that here next. So here I've got a list of, we hired him on December 1st. We expect him to be competent by March 1st, and we expect him to be qualified by June 1st. So give him 7 months to not only know his job, but also be able to train other people in the future to do his job. Because after 7 months, depending on how critical or hard the job is, you should at least have, and now this is a level 1 position, you should have some knowledge of how to train someone else. So here we have kind of all the different tasks here. New hire orientation. So on the back end, we've got a lot of data on that. I'll show you what that looks like. The safety orientations he needs to go through, safe land, defensive driving, etc. The forms understanding, what different forms he needs to fill out, pre-trips, JSA, safe work, hot work, dig permits, excavation permits, anything for the state that needs to be documented, inspection checklists, all of that is that task right there, number 3. Just that he understands them, knows what they look like, knows how to fill them out. Maybe doesn't know everything that's involved, but at least he understands them. Then we have pre-trip, which is pretty much, everybody. Then we have materials handling for the forklift, any sort of materials, and then hazardous materials. So, does he know how to operate a forklift? And then, what does he know how to work with hazardous materials? So obviously we have the dates here we hired him, the different tasks, etc. So this is a shop hand 1. This guy works in the shop, John Doe, he's there. What do we expect him to do? So I'm going to take that materials handling task and kind of break that down. So that's his task, materials handling, task number 5. So we have 2 sides here, competent and qualified. As I mentioned, knows the job. Second, can train someone else to do the job. So prior to operating, we must have a forklift operator course. That's in our safety manual. We have that documented there. Then we have space for trainer name and the date that he finished it. And so we want him to understand floor markings, company speed limits, seatbelt requirements, and this is above and beyond what the training is going to give you. This is more specific to the company. So understand that he needs to wear a seatbelt, can perform walkarounds, report deficiencies on the inspection form, communicates with other people when he's coming in and out of the work area, honks when he goes around corners, et cetera, et cetera. So that's him. John Doe can do the job. We've evaluated him, and somebody signs off on each and every single one of these competency levels. Then on the qualified side, we're going to require that he has a forklift instructor credential, meaning that he can teach someone else how to use a forklift. Then understand safe distance, OSHA requirements for floor markings, not just that they need to be there, but why they need to be there, what the expectations are, the width of them, the colors, the distance, the spacing, all these sorts of things. We're going to expect that so that when he goes to train somebody, he's given them actual knowledge. Then obviously himself operates forklift safely, can explain to other employees the reason for seat belts, and then we have a case study here that they can look up and use. Ensures others prepare work area correctly, that they perform inspections correctly, shows them how to prepare the materials, stack a pallet, wrap a pallet, use slings for all these different things. So we're essentially taking an individual, ensuring his safety knowledge is there, and then also his operational knowledge is there, and then we kind of combine that all together. And this really sets people up to be excellent in their job, gives them accountability so that he can't say, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to stack material correctly. Well, here it says you should have, and you could have read that on your own, and hopefully he has a mentor taking him through the process. So once again, this is kind of that same stuff blown up there, just what he's expected. And then that, once again, level 1 cannot handle hazardous materials. So we talk about company-specific SOPs, accountability, different resources out there, and quality assurance that we have, and then any limitations to that job. And then same thing on the qualified side. So I kind of already went through this, but we're giving them additional higher level safety understandings, verifying safety quality expectations within Basin safety, ensuring company standard operating procedures, and then validating others' competency of quality capabilities. So, and then this individual is expected to mentor others. We want to, kind of encourage and develop that so that people aren't just thinking, oh, my job is just to do my job. Well, if you've been in a place for a year or 2 or 5, we should be able to expect that you're taking initiative with other employees and developing them as well. And so this is kind of a little bit more of an advanced SSE training program, but we did this last year. Some of you guys have been in the oil industry for a long time, and so I just really want to challenge and encourage you to have something like this, even if it's just mental. Candidly, even if you just really go through the process of saying, okay, what should this individual be able to do after 3 months, 6 months? And it shouldn't be loose, where we expect one thing from one person and something else from somebody else. And the best way to eliminate that is to document it, and then kind of give that individual knowledge about where their deficiencies are, where they need to improve, and then how they can even advance within the company. All right, well, that pretty much concludes August's safety topics. Really appreciate you being part of the training. As always, you can scroll down below to take the quiz, and we'll get those records and share them with your safety department or your supervisors. As always, have a safe day out there, and really appreciate working with you. Have a great day.